It's been a year since David passed. A year since the silence around the house grew thick enough to wrap around my ankles every morning like mist rising from the forest behind our home. I'm 41 now, and I live with my son Tyler on the outskirts of the city, right where the pavement begins to yield to trees and the birds wake me earlier than any alarm clock ever could. Our house isn't much, but it's ours. A crooked fence surrounds the yard, and out back we've got a small wooden barn where we keep our cow, Daisy, and the 2 horses, Dusty and Ranger. Life changed when David died. It was sudden, a stroke they said, quick and merciless. One moment he was drinking coffee by the window, the next he was gone. I barely remember the funeral. What I do remember is standing in the pasture, a few days after, pitchfork in hand, staring at the hay like it held the answers. Didn't. Since then, I've run the household alone. Mornings start before the sun. I heat the kettle, pull on my boots, and step into the day, the dew still clinging to the grass. The animals know the sound of my steps now. Daisy moos softly when I approach, and the horses snort as I check their feed. Tyler usually sleeps in. He's 17 after all, and has grown increasingly attached to his laptop, headphones always half on, lost in whatever world flickers behind that screen. For a while, I worried he was slipping away from me. Grief does strange things to people, even young ones. He barely spoke those first few months, retreating into silence as I buried myself in chores. But something has shifted lately. Perhaps it's the season. Or maybe it's him growing into the kind of young man his father would have been proud of. Today was different. He joined me in the barn. Just stood there in the doorway, eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the wooden slats. "I want to help," he said. I didn't turn right away, not sure I'd heard him right. But when I looked over my shoulder, he was already moving toward Daisy, tentative, curious. "Can you show me how to milk her?" he asked. I nodded, surprised, a little amused. "It's not as easy as it looks," I warned. He laughed. "I figured. That's why I need you to teach me." And so we began. I sat on the old stool, showing him how to kneel, how to coax the milk gently, not to tug. His hands were unsure at first, and I found myself watching him, remembering when those same fingers were too small to tie his own shoes. He watched me closely. Too closely, it seemed at times. His eyes weren't the distracted, wandering ones I was used to. They were focused, steady, like he was trying to understand something deeper than the act of milking a cow. "Like this?" he asked, fingers curled just right this time. He nodded. "Exactly like that." He grinned, proud of himself. I felt something stir in my chest. Not discomfort, something more subtle, something softer. A realization that the boy I'd raised was now a man, or nearly so. And in his growing, he was coming back to me in small ways. Since David died, Tyler and I have become closer. Not in grand gestures or heart-to-hearts, but in the way we move around each other now. In the quiet moments where he refills my mug without being asked, or when he lingers in the barn after the work is done, like he's not ready to return to his screen just yet. There's a quiet understanding growing between us, one that doesn't need words to make itself known. And today, under the sloped roof of our old barn, as I showed him the rhythm of an ordinary task, I felt it more than ever. Maybe it's the way grief binds people. Or maybe it's just life nudging us back toward one another, gently, like a mother's hand on a shoulder. The weather turned warm sooner than usual that spring. The forest behind our home burst to life, trees swelling with new leaves, and the pasture smelled of rain and budding grass. Chores stretched longer with the added sunlight, and I welcomed the change. It gave me something to do, a way to keep moving. Stillness was the one thing I feared most. Tyler had started joining me outside more often. It wasn't every day, but often enough that I stopped being surprised by the sound of his boots crunching over the gravel path toward the barn. He'd begun asking questions about the feed, the hay, how often to trim hooves. And I answered each one, grateful for the attention, even if I didn't always understand where his sudden interest came from. One afternoon, I was brushing Dusty while Tyler mucked out the stalls. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and horses, the golden light pouring through the barn slats catching in the dust that floated lazily between us. It was a quiet moment, the kind I'd come to appreciate. No music, no laptop, just the steady rhythm of work shared in silence. Then, without warning, a commotion in the paddock made us both turn. Casper had mounted Dusty, nipping her neck as he climbed on top. It was clumsy, chaotic. Hooves scraping, tails swishing, the thudding of bodies meeting with wild, ungraceful force. I rushed out to the fence, instinctively ready to separate them, but stopped short when I realized it was natural behavior. Just nature doing what it does. Tyler stood next to me, silent for a long moment. "What are they doing?" he asked. His voice low but curious, almost too careful. I glanced at him. He wasn't watching the horses anymore. He was watching me. My breath caught just for a second. "It's how animals mate," I said, keeping my tone even. "It's part of how life begins." His eyes flicked back toward the paddock, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands fidgeted just a little. There was something else behind his question, something more than curiosity about farm life. He was testing something, stretching into a new kind of awareness about the world, about himself. And maybe about me. I leaned on the fence, trying to make the moment feel as ordinary as I could. "Horses don't overthink these things," I added with a small, quiet smile. "They just follow instinct." Tyler nodded slowly. "Is it always like that?" "Not always," I replied carefully. "But it's natural, even if it looks awkward to us." He didn't respond right away, and I didn't push him. We stood there in the growing hush of the afternoon, the paddock now quiet. The moment passed, but not forgotten. That night I made dinner while he sat at the table. His laptop closed for once. He watched me move around the kitchen, his eyes lingering in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not overtly, just enough that I could feel it, like the ghost of a touch that never landed. "You've been quiet," I said as I slid a plate in front of him. "Just thinking," he murmured, glancing up. "About what you said. About instinct." I didn't say anything, just gave him a small nod and turned back to the sink. But my hands trembled slightly as I turned on the tap, because I knew somehow that something had shifted. Not in a loud or frightening way, but in the subtle undercurrent of things. There was a new tension between us. Not the kind born of grief or misunderstanding, but of awareness. Of seeing each other not just as mother and son, but as people. Adults. Living in close proximity, navigating an empty house and long, quiet days. And in that silence, something unspoken was starting to grow. Evenings had grown still again, the way they tend to in spring before the fireflies arrive, when the air is soft but not yet warm, and the silence hums like a string waiting to be plucked. That night, I had curled up on the couch with a blanket over my knees and a mug of tea cupped in my hands. The soft ticking of the old clock in the kitchen was the only sound, its rhythm as familiar as my own heartbeat. The TV played something low and forgettable, more for background noise than entertainment. I was drifting, not quite tired but quiet inside. I noticed Tyler moving around the room more than usual. He wasn't restless in the typical teenage way. His movements were slower, intentional. He'd pick something up from the kitchen counter, put it down, walk toward the hallway, then turn back. Each pass brought him closer to me, until he finally stopped a few feet away. "Everything okay?" I asked, tilting my head. He nodded, then hesitated. Without another word, he stepped over and laid down across the couch. His legs stretched out along the cushions, and he carefully rested his head on my lap. The warmth of him startled me at first. I glanced down at his face, calm, unreadable, and felt the weight of his trust settle on me like a second blanket. "My stomach hurts," he said quietly, eyes still fixed on the ceiling. "Can you rub it a little? Just like you used to?" The question tugged at something inside me. A memory from years ago. Him as a boy, curled up in bed with the flu, my hands soothing him to sleep. But this wasn't the same. He wasn't a boy anymore. Still, I nodded, placing my hand gently on the soft fabric of his t-shirt, just below his ribs. I rubbed small, slow circles, trying to keep my touch motherly, detached. But the moment felt different. His body had grown into its form, lean and long, and my hand no longer dwarfed him the way it used to. With each movement, I could hear his breathing grow heavier, slower, louder. His eyes were closed now, his jaw tight. I paused for a moment, unsure, but he whispered, "That's okay. Keep going." So I did. My hand moved gently, mechanically, but my mind raced. I could feel the tension beneath my palm. Not pain, but something else. Something unspoken. Something blooming beneath the surface like roots in the dark. Then all at once he sat up. "Thanks," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "I feel better." And before I could say anything, he was gone, slipping down the hallway, leaving behind only the warmth of his body against the blanket and the faint echo of his footsteps on the floorboards. I sat there frozen. My fingers still tingled with memory. That boy I used to carry on my hip, who once clung to my apron and cried when he scraped his knee. He wasn't that boy anymore. I knew that. But tonight, the truth had unfolded itself more clearly than ever. He was growing up. The house was quiet again, but I noticed something through the window. A glow out in the pasture. The barn light was on. I hadn't left it on after the evening feed. I set down my tea, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside. The night was crisp, the kind that pricks at your cheeks and makes you feel more awake than you want to be. I walked slowly, trying not to startle any of the animals. The barn door was mostly closed, but not latched. And as I approached, I heard something. Voice. Private. Trained. I held my breath, stepping closer. Through the narrow crack between the door and the frame, the warm light inside poured out like a spill of honey, and in that glow I saw Tyler. His back was to me, shoulders hunched, hands braced on the edge of the milking stall. His head was bowed, and his cheeks were flushed red. His whole face a portrait of confusion and heat. He was whispering to himself, though I couldn't make out the words. But I didn't need to. Seen enough. I backed away slowly, my boots crunching softly against the gravel. My heart thudded in my chest, not from anger, not from fear, but from the stark, undeniable truth. He wasn't just growing up. He was awakening. And the world, once simple and clean, had begun to shift between us. That night sleep never found me. I lay in bed, the covers twisted around my legs, my body hot beneath the weight of my thoughts. Outside, the forest whispered through the trees, but inside me there was no peace. Just the echo of what I had seen in the barn, and the memory of Tyler's head on my lap. His breathing. His warmth. The way he looked at me, not as a child sees a parent but as a young man sees something else. I turned over, pressing my forehead to the pillow, trying to will the images away. But they clung to me, persistent. The way his voice had trembled when he asked for my help. The way he bolted afterward. And then the barn light. His flushed face. Something unspoken had crossed a line. And though nothing was said, I felt the weight of it settle between us like a breath that never quite leaves the chest. I tried to calm myself, to let the tension bleed out. I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift. Not to escape, but to understand. I needed to understand what I was feeling, where the line was, and how I would carry myself in the morning, when daylight returned everything to the shape of normal. Only, normal had already begun to shift. The next day, Tyler was quiet, but not withdrawn. He hovered, watching me more than usual. When I reached up to hang a dish towel, he was there behind me. "You look nice today," he said. It was a simple thing. But it wasn't the words that unsettled me. It was the way he said them. Softly, carefully, as if unsure whether he was crossing a boundary or daring me to notice that he was. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile, keeping my eyes on the task at hand. The air felt too warm, even though the windows were cracked open. I moved through the house with a practiced grace, pretending everything was fine, that the thread pulling tighter between us didn't exist. But I knew better. That evening, I found myself in my bedroom, sorting through an old box of clothes in the closet. Some things were long forgotten. Dresses I hadn't worn since before Peter died, summer skirts, faded shirts that still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. I was sitting on the floor, folded clothes around me, when I heard the door creak open behind me. "Mom!" Turned. Tyler stood in the doorway, eyes uncertain but full of something unspoken. "My stomach hurts again," he said. "Can I lie down here?" I hesitated, but I nodded. He stretched out across the bed, just as he had before, his head resting back against the pillows, his shirt lifted slightly over his stomach. "Can you rub it again?" he asked. His voice was softer now, more hesitant, but he was looking right at me. I walked over slowly, sitting beside him. My hand hovered for a second before I let it rest gently over his skin. His stomach was warm beneath my palm. I began to move in slow, measured circles, careful not to press too hard, not to think too much. He exhaled. "That's good," he whispered. "Is that enough?" I asked after a minute. He shook his head. "No, not yet." I continued, my heart beating a little too fast. The room was silent except for the sound of his breathing, and it was growing louder, more uneven with each motion. I could feel his muscles tense beneath my touch. I tried to stay calm, focused, but something inside me twisted with each breath he took. "Still hurting?" I asked again, my voice almost a whisper. "No. Yeah," he said, his voice breaking slightly. His cheeks had turned a deep red. His eyes were closed now, his brow furrowed, his breathing ragged. I stopped moving, my hand frozen in place. His body stilled, but only for a moment. Then he let out a shaky breath and turned his face toward the pillow, trying to hide. My breath caught in my throat. Understood now. Not everything, but enough. He hadn't come to me just because of a stomach ache. And suddenly, the weight of it, of this new truth, of this silent confession between us, settled over the room like dust after a storm. I didn't speak. Couldn't. And he didn't look at me. He just lay there, still and silent. And I sat, my hand trembling slightly above his skin, unsure of what I was feeling, except that it was deep and warm and complicated beyond anything I had ever prepared myself for.